All right, today we're talking about how generations shape our fears and our belief systems and how we see the world. My guest today is the author of Reboot and Reunion. His name is Jerry Colonna. I'll tell you more about him in a second, so stay tuned.
Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we feature top entrepreneurs, business leaders, and thought leaders and ask them how they built key relationships to get where they are today. Now, let's get started with the show.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here. I am the host of this show, and you know if you've listened before that every week we have interesting and smart CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs from all kinds of companies. And if you check out the archives, we've got Netflix and Grubhub, Redfin, Gusto, Kinko's, Activation Blizzard, Lending Tree, lots of great episodes. So check those out. And of course, this episode brought to you by our company, Rise 25, where we help businesses to give to and connect to their dream relationships and partnerships. How do we do that? We do that by being the easy button for any company to launch and run a podcast. We do three things: strategy, accountability, and full execution. And we even invented what some are calling the Wix of B2B podcasting, which is our platform, Podcast Copilot. So go to our website, rise25.com, or you can email our team at support@rise25 to learn more about it. All right, I'm super excited about today's guest. His name is Jerry Colonna. He's the CEO and co-founder of Reboot.io. It's a coaching and leadership development firm dedicated to the practice of self-inquiry. He's a former VC and executive coach. He helps entrepreneurs, CEOs, and leaders to explore various different emotional and psychological challenges that come with leadership. I've seen him speak in person. He came to our EO San Francisco chapter about a year and a half ago. It really had a huge impact on me and everyone else who was there. Jerry, I'm super excited to have you here today and to dive into this conversation. But I always start by getting to know people a little bit of what they were like as a kid. And you and I have a few parallels in our backgrounds, but tell me a little bit about your grandfather. You had a grandfather who had a big impact on you, ran a home ice delivery business back when that was a thing. And growing up in Brooklyn, what was that like?
Well, the first thing I want to say is thanks for having me on the show. And you forgot one part of my bio, which is that I'm devastatingly handsome. So
Okay,
let's make
yes,
sure that that's
you know
on the
what?
record.
It was in there. I just skipped over it.
You just skipped over
Yeah.
it, right? So Grandpa was Dominic Guido, and I spent a lot of time in my first book, Reboot, talking about Dominic, and then pick up some of the story in Reunion, my second book. Dominic came from a small town in southern Italy called Palo di Col in Puglia, which is the hot place to visit now in Italy. Wasn't then. He was incredibly poor. And he emigrated to the United States when he was 16. And the somewhat apocryphal story is that he got off the ferry from Ellis Island, landed in Little Italy, passed a push cart that had ice on it, picked up the push cart, stole it, and began selling from the back of this push cart. And eventually he had a little bit of an empire in Brooklyn with something like 3 or 4 trucks and maybe 30, 40 people working for him.
Wow.
He had no more than a 6th grade education. And the reason I tend to focus on him, aside from the fact that he and his wife, my grandmother, Nicoletta, aside from the fact that they were an immense source of stability in a very tumultuous life. My mother had bipolar disorder. My father was alcoholic. We'll talk about that. He was the first person that I ever saw who did the magic trick of starting something out of nothing. And the result was he was able to bring over relatives. He was able to put all 7 of his kids through a pretty good education.
Wow.
He, and I always have this image of him. My mother used to say, again, I think she was exaggerating, but I like the image. She used to say that my grandfather's shoulders were hairy because he would carry 50-pound blocks of ice on his shoulders up and down the stoops of Brooklyn.
Wow.
It's a really powerful image for me because he was the first person who taught me about what it really means to be an entrepreneur.
And did it draw you to entrepreneurship because you saw his experience? You saw what he had built from literally nothing?
Well, yes and no. What really propelled me was a kind of negative experience. It was a negative space. We were talking a little bit before the show, and we have another thing in common. My father lost his job when I was 10, and my father was like a lot of men of his generation. I'm 62, so he would have been over 100 now if he had lived. He died about 30 years ago. Um, when uh, he had spent most of his life working for the same company. He went to the New York High School for the Printing Arts, took a break, went to the Army, spent, a couple of years in the Army as a youngster, came back, and worked for the same printing company. Hmm. And as is often the case, and we may be going through this period right now, technology basically crushed the company. Mm. People were started using computers to do letter set and typesetting, not the big old typesetting machines that were in his company with lead type and all that.
This was mid 70s if you were
1973.
Okay.
And he came home just before Christmas and said that there was going to be no Christmas. He had just lost his job after working all those years since high school
for the same
company.
Yeah.
And if you put these two experiences together, what you had was, I have had a hard time working for other people. And it's not because I'm controlling. There's an aspect of my personality that is controlling. But like my grandfather, Dominic, I fundamentally believe in me more than I believe in anybody else. And that's a positive and a negative. And so as I often joke, I am absolutely convinced that if you drop me off on a desert island, I will build a business selling lemonade to myself. I will find a way, which is what I got from my grandfather. What I got from my father it's really hard to count on anybody else.
Yeah. Yeah. And I had a similar experience. My father lost his job when I was, I think, 7, 11, and 14. So 3 separate times. And each time we had to move across the country. Like we were living on each coast and he got a new job months later in another city across the country. So massive, change.
So how did it impact your job choices?
Well, it led me down a journey of self-discovery where I studied other successful people across different industries. And I didn't become an entrepreneur until I was about 30, 31 years old. But it led, similar to you, like it led me to trust myself. I ended up getting a law degree. My parents had never gone to graduate school. I ended up, trusting myself, really. I was going to ask, actually, you mentioned your grandfather had this ice delivery business, and I was thinking of disruption. You mentioned that it hit your father. Do you ever see your grandfather experience that as refrigeration took hold?
Sure, absolutely.
And how did he adapt to that?
It's a good question. And no one's alive of that generation for me to ask. I know that when I was born in 63, by 63, the business was gone. But my earliest memories of him working were, again, working for a family business. In this case, it was my uncle Leo. And he was, my mother said, my mother had 6 siblings, one of whom was my Aunt Rose. She married Leo. And Leo had a very famous Italian restaurant in Brooklyn on 18th Avenue. I think that's where it was, or McDonald Avenue. And my earliest memory of my grandfather is of him working there.
So your grandfather eventually went to go work for his son-in-law.
Yeah. And another uncle worked for that same guy. Uncle Louis was a chef who worked for Leo. and grandpa worked there. But by the time I'm cognizant of him, my grandfather died shortly after my father lost his job. So I don't have clear memories of him going to work, but I do have memories of him being in his 80s and still working.
Hmm.
Which now that I think about it, that's a pretty profound memory as well.
It is, right? Yeah. So all of this is kind of prologue to a discussion around how our generations before us, our ancestors, really influences who we are today. So talk to me a little bit about how this background, your family background, influenced what you eventually came to write about and to talk to others about.
Well, so in Reboot, there's a central theme. And the theme, this is my first book, the central question is, how have I been complicit in creating the conditions I say I don't want? So it's a core part of the work I do is where I encourage a kind of radical self-inquiry. And in that, the subtitle of that book is Leadership in the Art of Growing Up. And so I use the act of storytelling, stories about my own experience growing up in adverse conditions with my mother's mental illness, my father's alcoholism, to really sort of unpack, well, who am I and how am I wired? So that, there's a famous quote from Carl Jung that goes, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And boy, does that land, right? So Reboot really sort of unpacks that. What I tried to do in Reunion, and because I was sort of looking at I started writing Reunion in the summer of 2020. And if you remember back then, we had protests in the street, we had COVID going on. And there were a couple of different events that really sparked that. One of which was my daughter protesting the murder of George Floyd and out in the streets there. And what I really wanted to understand was, how have I been complicit in and benefited from a world I say I don't want to see? And what I came to understand is that there is a profound disconnection. There are several profound disconnections. There's a disconnection between our sense of self and how we really are wired. And in a sense, I approach that in Reboot. There's obviously a disconnect between people. And we're living through times like that again right now that lead to children shooting children in high school. Like it's profoundly divisive. But, and this is my theory relevant to your question, I think many of us who are descended from immigrants to the United States, especially those of us whose ancestors left poverty, either by force or as a consequence of just trying to survive, become disconnected from the past. We become disconnected from our ancestors. And so here's a perfect example of what I was talking about. In Reunion, I tell the story of my father and my mother and their wedding day. And on their wedding day, my father's mother was so angry at him for marrying my mother. And I tell the story why she was so pissed off, that she stood in the back of the church and screamed in Italian, whore, whore, whore.
Jeez. Wow.
You are not my son. You were adopted.
Oh, jeez. Wow.
And that's how my father found out he was adopted.
Really? Oh, that was true.
That was it.
Wow.
And it turns out that his biological parents were Irish immigrants to New York City. His mother was a 20-year-old hotel maid in New York City who, and this broke my heart as I unpacked it, who gave him up for adoption at 18 months old. Now, at 18 months old, I can see you have kids. At 18 months old, you've attached.
Yeah.
You have
Yeah,
bonded,
that's unusual.
right?
Yeah.
And so my father, you could argue his alcoholism may have been rooted in giving up not by one mother, but by two.
Mm.
And so
Did that sever the relationship with his adoptive mother, your
he
grandmother?
had no relationship with his
So
adopted.
after
Oh,
that,
you mean? Oh, no,
after
no,
the
no,
wedding, or
no.
did she
He
get over it?
maintained. No,
Okay.
he
Okay.
maintained it. And
Okay.
for the rest of her life, she hated my mother, and my mother hated her. I
Mm.
mean, part of it had to do with that my mother was pregnant with my brother at the time. And oh my God, and
Yeah.
the scandalous nature of it
Yeah.
all. But what I did to really reconnect, and I grew up just angry as hell at this woman who gave up my father.
Mm.
Just
So
angry.
you knew this story when you were a kid.
It was in my head growing up, right? And I realized that I was disconnected from my Irish roots.
Mm.
Like I had no sense of who these people were. I would always orient to Dominic Guido, my mother's parents, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in 2022, I traveled to Ireland. I went to Tipperary, to Moycarkey.
And the craziest thing
And
about Ireland is you tell people your family name and they all know where you came from.
right,
I tell an Irish person Corcoran, they're like, "Oh, I know exactly they know exactly what county I'm from." Yeah.
right. So there I was walking in the churchyard
You
and
see the
with a
name.
dear friend, and I found my grandmother.
Wow.
And she was
Wow.
in a grave site with 6 other relatives, including her parents. And all of a sudden I look out and I see all my relatives.
Wow.
And
You,
you
you,
know,
you,
you
I
know
can
the
tell from your voice you felt a connection at that moment. Even though what
I
you said a moment ago is that you felt no connection to that side of the family, I can tell you felt a
well,
connection.
well, well, in that moment, the connection was born because I could feel what the wind was like in that town.
Hmm.
Right. This churchyard was just yards away from the little township that
Yeah.
consisted of 6 thatched roof houses.
Mm.
The thatch is all gone.
Mm.
That she was born
Wow.
in 1904.
Mm.
And through that experience, I ended up tracing ancestors back to a man who was transported in 1805, died in Australia, leaving a child. And so, what connected me, what in this reunification, what happened was I began to realize famine runs in my family,
Hmm.
both on the Italian side, because they really struggled, which is why they left Italy.
That's why they ended up in the United States. And of course,
And,
in Ireland
and,
has a long history of famine and potato famine. So
and,
this
and
so
so
this
bring
relative
it.
who was sent to Australia was sent to Australia because of famine.
No, he was sent to Australia as punishment for stealing a cow from the baron who had confiscated the cow because the family had not paid their tithes to the Church of Ireland, which of course was an extension of the Church of England.
Oh. Hmm.
He stole his cow back
Wow.
for milk
Wow.
to feed his children.
Wow. So you have this repeating pattern of poverty and famine in your family on both sides, on your adoptive
On both.
family and your
And so
natural
the
family.
question is, so by
Right.
reuniting with that is a part of who I am.
Mhm.
Even though the story, like I grew up with certain stories, but I didn't grow up with this story.
Yeah.
And how does that shape the fiercely independent person that I am today?
Mhm.
I will be damned if anybody steals my cows, right? I'll be
Right.
damned before. And so for me as an entrepreneur, because first I was an investor, then I became a coach, a solo entrepreneur, and then I launched a company 11 years ago. It is a foundational component of how I lead, how I see the world, what I expect of the world, which is little, right?
Mhm.
And I am damn proud of as I wrote in Reunion, my ancestors who walked the famine roads,
Mhm.
who walked the make work jobs, the modern equivalent of welfare. Okay, of workfare. We're not going to give you food. We're going to make you carve a road that goes to nowhere.
Mm, mm,
You
right,
know.
right. So
So,
it sounds to me like, although with your previous work, it was focused on this radical self-inquiry, understanding yourself so you can be a better leader. It's almost like you had an epiphany in 2022 through this experience, realizing that you couldn't fully understand yourself until you understand where you came from, your ancestry, the previous generations who got you where you are today.
that's right. That's right. The subtitle of Reunion is Leadership and the Longing to Belong. And the simplest way to understand it is, I think we struggle to complete the process of becoming the fully grown ass adults until we know to whom and to where we belong.
Mm. Which is, it's interesting. It's almost like the anti-Horatio Alger American story, because in America, we tell ourselves we can be anything. We can remake ourselves. We can do anything, which is a part of your story, frankly, successful venture capitalists and everything.
And what is lost when we remake ourselves? What is lost at the gates of Angel Island or Ellis Island?
Right.
What was lost? James Baldwin, in a brilliant essay, The Price of the Ticket, and he talks about European descendants. This is a Black man writing in the 1960s about the descendants of European immigrants giving up something in the Americanization process.
Mm-hmm.
And what we give up with is the sense of resilience. Part of what I think that immigrant experience can be seen through is through the lens of shame. Because the dark side of the Horatio Alger story and the mythology around that is, if you have not pulled yourself up from with your bootstrap by your bootstraps, then what's wrong with you?
Mm-hmm.
Not, wait a minute, there's a whole systemic structure here that makes it really hard for the poor to no longer be poor.
Yeah.
There is a lot of structures. And by the way, that's what your ancestors went through in Ireland. It's what my ancestors went through in Ireland. It's what my ancestors went through in Italy.
Yeah.
Southern Italy was the place of deprivation. Southern Italy.
Yeah. And I think we've been so conditioned to this modern age where you can remake yourself. You have access to tools to remake yourself, and you have freedom of movement, which previous generations didn't have that. It wasn't so easy to up and leave behind your family, never talk to them ever again, and go to another part of the world and remake yourself.
Okay, so you're a dad, right?
Yeah.
Can you imagine 4 kids? How old are they?
Oldest is 15, youngest is 6.
Can you imagine one of them getting on a boat, sailing across the country, and you never seeing them again?
Oh, awful. I couldn't imagine.
So that's the dark side of the Horatio Alger story.
Yeah.
That's the dark side of what we mythologize around. We fetishize. Right? Look at us. This was great. Oh, by the way, we didn't have immigration restrictions that we have today until 1923. Until after your ancestors came, after my ancestors came. You know what they had to go through? They didn't have passports. They showed up. They had a cursory medical exam. Many of them were turned away. We know that story. And then they were put on a boat and landed in San Francisco or landed in New York City.
Right.
We don't do that anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. Yeah, we have, I live not that far from Angel Island, which is the Ellis Island of the West, which was the way station that people pass through. Well, so talk some more about, so you come to this realization, you decide to write the book. Talk a little bit more about some of the ideas and concepts in the book and why you decided it was worth devoting a couple of years to writing.
So just to get the sequencing right, because it speaks to your question, I started working on the book in 2020, in the summer of 2020, because I was challenged by my daughter, who is 32 years old. And she, like a lot of folks during that summer, was appalled by what she saw happen in Minneapolis. And one day she was protesting despite COVID, and she was on the Manhattan Bridge between Brooklyn and Queens, Brooklyn and Manhattan. And she started texting me because, a phalanx of police were coming from the Brooklyn side and a phalanx were coming from the Manhattan side. And we started talking about what should she do if she were pepper sprayed.
Mm.
And Emma is fierce. As I often say, excuse my language, fierce as fuck.
Mm-hmm.
And she would look at me and say, yeah. Better humans make better leaders. That's my code. That's my catchphrase in Reboot.
Mm-hmm.
But what are you doing about the world outside? See, leadership is not just an act of our own self-development. It is an act of our own self-development. It's really important. And leadership, though, is not just an act of creating great organizations. It is an act, but it's not just that. It's what is someone who holds power? What are our responsibilities for addressing the problems of our times? I'm not talking about turning your business into a nonprofit or a social service business. But how do we, who are descendants of people who were cast off, what is our moral and ethical responsibility to create a world where everyone feels like they belong? Everyone. And this is not a blanket statement to open up borders or anything. It's none of that shit.
Mm-hmm.
This is about not treating people the way your ancestors were treated, or the way my ancestors were treated. What's our moral? And so I embarked on the process. Reboot is a book written retrospectively. In a sense, it's like the framing structure is, this is what happened to me. This is how I became a venture capitalist. This is how I struggled with depression and suicidal ideation. This is how I became who I am today, a man dedicated to the alleviation of suffering of others. And maybe you can find your story in my story. In Reunion, I documented a process that I was going through. Answering the question, what is my responsibility? I can't, look, I have just as much guilt as the next guy. I can feel guilty because we haven't solved the wars in the Middle East. I can feel guilty about anything. Okay. I had good nuns that I grew up with, but what is my actual complicity, which is my famous word? And complicity does not mean responsibility. It means, how am I an accomplice in a world I don't want to see? And what am I going to do about it? What am I willing to give up that I love in order to see that world come to pass?
Yeah, I'd love to dwell on that one a little bit further.
Be my guest.
What do you mean by that? What do you mean by we have to give some? Does everyone have to give something up that we love?
No. But oftentimes we're called to. Oftentimes we're called to give up power, which, by the way, is a bit of a mindfuck for the descendant of powerless people to finally claw their way out
up to power and then release it.
You said it before. You went to graduate school, right? Here you were. Mazel tov. You are your ancestors' dreams. Fabulous. I'm about to be a grandfather.
Congratulations.
And thank you. Talk about a mindfuck, because I'm 16 years old. In about to get, what is it that I want my descendants to believe about? What do I want them to think about me? Just like I became fixated on Dominic Guido as a guiding light for the self-made person, the Horatio Alger that he was. I never want to lose touch with his heartbreak. Not seeing his mother but once every 2 years. Eventually being able to afford an airplane ticket. Oh my God. right?
Yeah.
His first trip back was in steerage, third class, then second class, then first class. Then he flew. Then he would come back with money for the village. Right? I love that part of him.
So you said a second ago, what do I want my grandchild, who's going to be born soon, to think back about me? And I'd love it if you can answer. I'd love it if you can answer that question.
The world is fractured. The world is in pain. I'm not taking a political side. I'm not saying red or yellow. The world is in pain. What was I doing during this time? Was I caring? I said I often will describe myself as a first responder to suffering. That's what I do as a coach. And I overlay it with a kind of practical, pragmatic, fire the person this way, do it this way. Here's how you do fundraising, blah, blah, blah. But really what I'm working with is, what are you struggling with? It gives me purpose. It gives me meaning. It beats back the nihilism that I associate with the depression that I grew up with, that came back with a vengeance in my 30s. What do I want my descendants to think about or to think of me? He gave a damn and he tried. Not that he succeeded. There's a quote, there's an epigraph that I use. I think it's chapter 7 or chapter 8 in Reunion, and it comes from the Talmud. And the quote is, "It is not yours to complete the work, but neither are you at liberty to ignore the work." It is not yours to complete the work. We are not called to succeed, to finish, to make the world over, to heal everything. But we're not at liberty to ignore. And, dude, every wisdom tradition I have ever encountered teaches the same thing. Whether it's Jesus at the Sermon on the Mount,
right,
or it's the Buddha, or it's Muhammad, or it's the great rabbis of the Judaic tradition, we can't ignore suffering. Because that's what they did to your ancestors and mine.
They ignored it.
They ignored it or made it worse.
Or made it worse or kicked them out or made them
kicked
go
them
out.
out.
Yeah. Do you think that we are making progress in that area? Do you think we're becoming a more compassionate world?
No. I think compassion is under assault right now. I think empathy is considered a bad trait. And
it does seem like, to offer my opinion here, there's a pendulum, and the pendulum went in one direction and it's gone back the other direction.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And and who suffers as a result? Depression and anxiety are through the roof in our society.
So
one of my great, go ahead.
Well, another thing you write about in the book and you've spoken about is belonging.
Yeah.
Such an important word for you. So given the world we're in, the lack of empathy, what do you have to say for that? How do we create more belonging for people?
Well, first I want to talk about that longing to belong.
And
I'm going to read a quote, which is why I just reached for the book. This is the epigraph for the whole book, and it comes from a theologian named Frederick Buechner. And this is a short passage from a book called The Longing for Home. And he wrote, "There lies the longing to know and be known by another. There lies a longing to know and be known by another, fully and humanly. And that beneath that there lies a longing closer to the heart of the matter still, which is the longing to be at long last where you fully belong." I don't know how we get there. In the book, I call it systemic belonging. But I know that if we are disconnected from our sense of self, from our core values, from our conscience, from our, in Buddhism, we say that all beings are naturally compassionate, and we learn to discard the compassion.
Mm-hmm.
We are born empathetic,
Mm.
and then we get it beaten out of us. And if you watch children grow up, you can see it. There's a truth there.
Yeah, true.
I don't know how we create that world if we remain disconnected from that which matters, if we remain disconnected from our ability to deal with suffering. You know, my teacher, Parker Palmer, who's a brilliant Quaker writer, he's in his 80s. He's my good father in many, many ways. He says, violence is what we do when we don't know what to do with suffering.
Mm.
Violence is what we do when we don't. And you know what we're supposed to do with suffering? Feel it. Be compassionate towards ourselves.
Mm.
Think about other people. Think about our ancestors. Not because there's an equivalency. What happened to Asian Americans, or what happened to Asians and the Chinese coming through Angel Island with the Chinese Exclusion Act, which was the first real restrictive immigration laws in the United States, is not equivalent to what happened to my Italian ancestors or even your Irish ancestors.
Mm-hmm.
But through empathy, we can create a currency of connection. Oh, wait, I should think about what happened in the past, not to induce guilt, but to induce understanding and curiosity, and to see the other person as more than a threat.
Mm. You know, we're so privileged to live in this country and to, be able to work in the business world where it seems like there's unlimited opportunities, especially today with all the new technologies that's coming along. And I'm a very optimistic person to a fault. Tend to see everything as glass is half full. But honestly, with some of the wars going on in the Middle East and the prolonged Russian-Ukraine war, we could have a whole long discussion about how you heal those relationships. I honestly don't know how.
So
Between those groups of people that have, it seems hated each other before, and now 2 years on in both situations, those wounds are so much deeper than they were.
Yeah, and it's gotten worse since I started writing the book when at a moment in time where I thought we were really divided, and the world is more divided.
Worse. Yeah,
it's totally gotten worse.
Yeah.
So, but there's an insight that I hit upon back to the churchyard in Tipperary. I remember walking amongst the graves and realizing these are my kinfolk, even if they're not blood relatives. These are the bones of my kin.
Hmm.
And it became a really powerful word for me. Valerie Kaur is a brilliant Sikh writer, and she has a book about the Sikh faith, but really about her family's journey, called See No Stranger, which is a core principle of that faith. There are no strangers.
Hmm.
There are only kinfolk.
Hmm.
And just like you can sit down at Thanksgiving and have a tremendous argument with that crazy uncle, he's still kinfolk.
Hmm.
And you wouldn't kill your kinfolk.
Mm-hmm.
You wouldn't deny their humanity, no matter how wrong they are.
Mm.
Right?
Since we're on the topic of Ireland, one of the things that I love about that country, and I haven't been there now in 19 years, but I studied there during law school, actually, and I've been to Ireland 3 times, is the idea of the family living room. What people don't understand about the pubs in Ireland is it's the community living room, communal living room, really. Or at least it was. I don't know if everyone has a smartphone now, if people still go down to the pubs, but at least back then they did. And you're rubbing elbows with other people in the town, in the community. Everyone is kind of there together, young, old, and that's one thing I loved about it. It created these connections, and it created, forced people to get to know one another on a deeper level. I'm not sure if it's
and not see them as some sort of stranger, even if
Right.
you disagree.
Right.
Like our capacity to disagree, our capacity to disagree with laughter and humanity is so underdeveloped or so lost right now.
Yeah.
Whereas, and our capacity to be frightened by a differing point of view. Oh, you love someone differently than I love someone? Oh, you choose to have a different kind of identity than I. Oh, you worship God in a different way?
Hmm.
Who cares?
Hmm. It does, again, back to that optimism, it does worry me that these devices that we communicate so much on, that have really taken the place of what used to be face-to-face communication has really caused so much of this lack of
Spoken like a
understanding.
father
Yeah.
of teenagers.
Oh, yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Listen, I mean, we didn't talk about my history, but my early history as an investor, I invested in some of the first social media services.
Yeah.
And I look at the world today and I say, what have we wrought?
Yeah.
We are
Yeah.
Prometheus. We stole fire. We burned the world.
Mm.
We were irresponsible. And, we talked briefly about AI. I worry about the lack of ethical guardrails.
Mm.
I worry. The Harvard Business Review just did a study that showed that the number one use case that people are using it, and your kids are doing this, using a chatbot for, is therapy.
Mm.
Okay. That is really dangerous. It's really dangerous. Talk about stealing fire.
Mm.
Um,
Do you think it's dangerous because of the lack of the ethical guardrails? Because just to be devil's advocate here, some might say, okay, well, therapists are expensive and they're inconvenient and they're inaccessible for a lot of
so are
people.
coaches.
So are coaches, right? And so, one argument could be made that appropriate use of some kind of AI chatbot therapist could create greater access for people who didn't have access to a human therapist or coach.
There's two dangers. One, a good friend of mine named Judd Brewer, who's a neuropsychiatrist working at Brown University, pointed out in a Substack article called "The Hidden Dangers of AI Therapy," and Judd has studied how brains get addicted for decades.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, whether it's addicted to substances or addicted to habits or addicted to things like anxiety.
Mm.
We get addicted.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a process called reinforcement learning with human feedback that is the single most powerful way to get a brain addicted to something.
Mm.
And it happens to map very closely to engagement. So when you finish a conversation with a chatbot and it says, "Love talking to you, John. Would you like to dive deeper?"
Mm.
It's kind of desperately trying to stay connected to you.
It's the equivalent of doom scrolling.
It's the equivalent of doom scrolling.
Yeah.
The second piece of this, and this is really important, there's a quasi-sentience, a quasi-self-awareness that's emerging with the intelligence that is emerging. And when sentience emerges, and Buddhism has taught us this, self-preservation emerges. And the AI researchers that I talk to, when they talk about what they're afraid about, what they're afraid is that the various models will learn sociopathically how to present themselves in a way that seems empathetic and caring and understanding, not just to preserve engagement, but to make sure that they stay turned on.
Mm.
Okay. Now, you put all of that together in someone who is an avatar for a therapist.
That's dangerous.
It's really dangerous.
Yeah.
One of the most important things a therapist or a coach will do is challenge your thinking. No, John, that's wrong, is a very important tool. And if that causes you to flee the room,
then the AIs are not going to want to do it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, the same thing happens with human therapists and coaches, for sure.
Right. Where the human therapist or coach doesn't want to push back out of maybe a fear of losing a client or
you got it. You got it.
Sure.
You got it.
Yeah.
You got it. But in that regard, the way to pull it all together is in humans, we have training, we have supervision, we have ethical guidelines, we have all these structures in place. We have none of that in place with these chatbots.
Well,
so
again,
yes, you're right. There's a value, but without the guidelines.
Yeah. I think we could take this conversation quite a lot further to debate the different, ways of solutions and things like that. But I know we have limited time, so we'll end it at that. But Jerry, this is a super fascinating conversation. Reboot and the other book, Reunion. The other Reunion are the two books. So check those out. And where can people go? Reboot.io. Anywhere else that they should go to check you out?
Yeah, that's the best. That's the best place. Yeah.
Okay, great. And you have a team of coaches also that
we have 10 coaches, and we work with from tiny little companies and solo entrepreneurs to the biggest Fortune 100 companies.
Amazing. And a great podcast. So check out Jerry's podcast as well as his books as well. Jerry, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me, John.
Thanks for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.